We have Will Sullivan, right?
Yep.
Yes.
And myself, Chris Allgaier. We have Skip. And
Yep.
Courtney is on. Janet is on. Kevin is on. And Joe is on. Did I miss anyone? Okay. Appreciate everybody joining today. Just want to take a few minutes to confirm or presumably reconfirm that we want to be dressed up for the ball game for piggyback dredging in the event that the core work goes in time to give us a little window of opportunity. So does anyone have an opinion whereby we should not position ourselves to be ready for piggyback dredging? Okay. Recognizing that to be ready, there'll be a small cost in the preparation of an RFP, although most of that cost would be incurred next year anyway. So there's not much of an incremental cost. It's just an earlier expenditure than if we didn't get ready. And also, if we're successful and able to dredge, then the cost of the dredging would be incurred in December of this year. And just to put an estimate on it, if we were lucky enough to be able to get all 56,000 cubic yards dredged, it could be in the neighborhood of $2.2 million. That's just using an estimate of $40 per cubic yard. Conversely, if we get a window of opportunity, but it's not large enough to do the full 56,000, maybe we just are able to pick a number, 20,000, in which case I think we would have him do a direct path from the ramp out to the federal anchorage, which is where we're trying to get to.
Will, is that a good idea to do that second one at least?
If we can. Yeah, if we have the time to do it, it would be great.
So as we go forward, we'll probably want to set a bogey where, after discussion with a contractor, there's probably a minimum number of days. Well, he's already mobilized, but there may be a minimum number where it may not be worth it if he only has 3 days. But we don't have to decide that now.
Chris, if I could inject a footnote, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Very good.
A couple of years ago, Craig Martin told us that the rate of flow of the silt continues into the channel at the rate of 8,000 to 10,000 cubic yards a year. So based on when the Army Corps did their last evaluation, there's going to be an additional amount since that time.
Presumably, although I think in the later in time it is, and it's been whatever 20 plus years, I think the infiltration rate is somewhat lower. The average over time would be the 8 to 10. In fact, I think the average is like 7,000 based over the last 20 years. So still in the same ballpark. Joe, your point being that instead of 156,000 yards, the Corps may have like 166 or thereabouts.
Yeah, I'm just relating. That was the rate he established in June of 2017.
Right.
At a meeting, he told us it was at that time 8,000 to 10,000 a year.
Yeah.
That's for the federal channel, not for.
Oh, that's right. That's for the federal. You're right. I had the basin numbers etched.
Because the coastal studies came up closer to what you're saying, Chris.
Yeah, but it's not an exact science. But I think it is good to recognize that that the Corps' data was 2018. I think is what their current quantity is based on. So now, as part of their RFP, the contractor has to do a before and after survey, and the Corps itself was going to do one, a pre-dredge survey. So they should be zeroing in on those numbers pretty soon. And even, not to minimize, even if it is an extra 10,000 yards, that's in the neighborhood of 4 extra scows if they're using the 2,500 yard scows. But a good thing to keep in mind that we've always known the schedule is aggressive for the Corps, and we may or may not be afforded an opportunity. But I think we're all in agreement that we want to be dressed for the ball game and be ready to go. With piggyback dredging, because nobody else could mobilize given the uncertainty. So I was hoping that either Mike or Dan would be on. You know, Felix had raised the point that other towns seem to have been able to glom on to the Corps, recognizing that the Corps itself is competitive bidding. And so I think Kurt's point was, does their competitive bid process not satisfy the town's competitive bid, and therefore we could go with the low bidder? I don't know if people had a chance to see Dan's email on it this morning, but apparently he and Mike spoke and said that we definitely have to go out for an RFP. So let's go down the RFP path. We can always circle back to Dan and Mike and make sure that their opinion takes into account that the Corps is doing competitive bid. But in the meantime, we can start preparing an RFP, which we would have to do for our scope anyway. One comment about piggyback dredging, we still have some permits that are outstanding for us to do ours. The Corps is okay. And Joe, you may have some previous insight on this, but essentially what's outstanding is an Army Corps permit with respect to mitigation of part of the basin, which, because it hasn't been dredged in so long, they don't view it as maintenance dredging.
Can I interrupt for 1 minute? Alfred's
Sure.
just walked in with me, so now he's here on the record.
Oh, okay, good. Hi, Alfred.
How are we doing?
Good. So GEI, Alyssa Richard is working with the Corps on it, but you know, I want to make sure that we don't lose the clock. I don't want people at the Corps thinking, well, it doesn't have to be solved until next season. It has to be solved now for us to be able to piggyback. So we'll stay on top of that. And essentially, I think the discussions have centered around, well, it would be a cost. And even the Corps has acknowledged that, well, it shouldn't be a full cost thing, which would be some exorbitant rate. We also have presented that, you know, we the town have purchased this high delta trust, and so that represents, in our minds, a form of mitigation. So we're trying to play that card as well, and we'll just need to ratchet it up so that the clock doesn't run out. And then with the Corps of Engineers permit issued, there's a notice of intent, which GEI has prepared and is ready to issue as soon as this other permit issue gets resolved.
Those are the only two issues standing in way of us actually digging if we got a company to do the dredging.
Yes.
The only permits outstanding.
Yeah, and it's probably really only one permit, but and then you issue a notice of intent, but two documents for sure.
Chris, my understanding is that all the permits were secured. Do you know what the one outstanding permit is?
Yes, it's one to be issued by the Corps of Engineers, and it has to do with they have to date made a determination that, and I believe it's the Southern Basin, it hasn't been dredged since, I don't know, the early 50s or something.
1957.
Yes, okay. And therefore, they don't view our project as maintenance dredging. They would be new dredging. And so they're wrapped around the axle a little bit on that, but they also acknowledge that whatever the mitigation would be for new dredging, well, they don't think that's appropriate. So
they being who, Chris?
the Corps.
Mm-hmm.
So GEI is working with, his name is Phil Nimisic or something along those lines. I have to look it up. So what I need to do is push Alyssa to get everything out on the table, not Alyssa per se, but the core, to say, okay, what's your logic? You know, what's the issue? What's your logic? And what's the resolution?
Going back about 5 or 6 years in the former dredging committee, at that time, the state tried to tell the town that Area 2 would be new dredging because it hadn't been done in such a long time, 1957. At that time, dredging came under the State Waterways Division. The chief engineer was Kevin Mooney, who's now retired. And he went to bat for the town and finally prevailed that the state agreed that Area 2 would be considered maintenance and not new dredging. So my question is, if what we're talking about now is categorized as new dredging, would core samples, et cetera, and all of that have to be done?
Well, it sounds like it's the very issue. So if you're suggesting that it was resolved, if there's some documentation on that, I think that would be helpful. What would we have that would kind of resurrect this issue and whatever resolution there seemed to have
Well,
been?
the main objection at that time came from the endangered species folks, the turtle group, I call
Yeah.
them.
Yes.
And when Kevin Mooney prevailed, I believe they put it in writing to the town that they were okay with regarding Area 2 as maintenance dredging and not new dredging.
When you say they were okay, meaning the turtle people?
Endangered species group.
Yes, and my understanding is that was truly resolved, as you indicated, by virtue of we've made a payment to them already.
Correct,
Yeah.
we made a mediation type of a payment to him. That was to
Yeah.
a woman that was in charge of that particular area in the state.
Yeah. So it sounds like this is the same issue being recycled. I'm trying to think what else we have in the way of past documentation. It may be with people changing, and maybe because responsibility for the issue has changed, or do you think it's still state waterways?
Well, Dr. Eve Schluter, head of the endangered species unit, and I have her contact information, was the woman we spoke with. And the final decision was hers when we paid them $22,500 of mitigation. So, you know, a phone call to her might reveal that. And she may forward documentation, although I do believe that Mike and the TA at that time received it. The TA was Harry Turkanian.
Yeah.
And he might be a good resource because he was a major figure at that time and handled the mitigation with Dr. Schluter. So a phone call to him might provide you with more definitive information.
Now,
Okay.
would that have been something that GEI would have been taking a part of to get?
Well, at that time, it was Born Engineering. Born Engineering was by itself. It didn't become a part of GEI.
It was a separate part that didn't join GEI?
That's correct.
They were acquired by GEI acquired Born. And just background, Born Engineering was the name of an individual. It's not after the town itself. It was an individual's name that had started Born Engineering.
Russell Titmus was the chief engineer, and he goes back to 2001 with doing our work.
And
So he has a huge,
still active, I believe.
He's another resource you could check with on that.
Okay. Joe, you get a chance if you can send me contact information for Dr. Eve Schluter.
Yes.
And I assume I can find Harry somewhere unless someone,
I can send you his contact info as well as Russell Titmus.
okay.
Hey, Joe, if you already have, a rapport with those people, would you like to contact them to get that ball rolling?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
wouldn't mind doing that, but it's been several years since I've had contact with them.
Well, how can you forget Joe?
I'm sorry?
Details to follow.
How could
Um,
anybody, right?
Yeah,
But
no, go ahead, Joe.
yeah, I'd be willing to do that, sure.
Okay, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that would
Okay,
be,
so you'll do that. Go ahead.
For a fee, of course.
Well, yes,
We'll
you'll
give
get
you
our
a-
usual undying gratitude at market price.
You can give me a gold-plated key to the Marina men's room. How's that?
Will's going to have to speak to that. I still use a paperclip. Hi, Kurt.
Hi. I did want to add one thing, Joe, to the conversation about Harry, and I apologize for being late. I don't know if you've talked about it already, but I did reach out to him. He was obviously the chief procurement officer for the town of Wellfleet and has gone through all of the procurement training. I reached out to a couple of people, and I let Chris know too on this issue of piggybacking, and I know that Dan Hort was talking about issuing an RFP anyway to do the piggyback. But it might be worth at least asking Harry. I did reach out to him about what in his experience we may be able to do with not having to bid. There's sole source requirements that we might be able to qualify or comply with, and or because it's already been publicly bid, we may have met the requirements of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in that process anyway. So he would be a guy to reach out to. I did reach out to Chatham. They've not ever done one. I reached out to Falmouth and to Barnstable, at least to try to canvass some people and see if we could get some data on what other people have done.
Harry is an excellent resource, and when he left the TA's position, was very generously offering his time in any way he could help.
Yeah,
So, Joe, when you call Harry about this other issue on the permits, can you also ask him about the procurement? I mean, I'd be glad to do it, or you can do it. Or,
Yeah. You'd have to email me the specific question with the information for me to do that.
Okay. And I think, and that makes sense. I think also, though, as a courtesy, I'll contact Mike and Dan and say, hey, we're not yet fully convinced that this core process doesn't already fulfill our obligation, and we're going to pursue it. I don't want to.
I would recommend you start with Dan first.
Yeah. Yes.
Harry.
Yeah. All right.
Dan's a finance guy, and may very well have that information and may want to be involved.
Well, yeah, Dan's position on it was pretty clear that he felt that we needed to go out to separate bid, and that it's unlikely anybody's going to be able to beat whoever the Corps has on the project anyway, because they'll already have mobilization and demobilization in their bid. But he felt a separate bid process was required.
But
Harry
has some perspective that Dan doesn't.
Exactly,
The other
yeah.
question I have is, if we put it out for bid and no one bids but the successful bidder, have we satisfied the obligation? I assume we would have.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a concern in that,
Yeah.
because the contractor that's coming, in theory, could double his price per yard because he'd be the only one here. So my question is, maybe this is a question that Joe could ask Harry if he gets to that stage. Would we be just better off finding out whether or not, since it's been bid, that we would pay the same price per yard without the demob and the mob? You see what I'm saying? If they say they're gonna do it for $3 a yard, and I'm picking a number,
Yeah, yeah.
and we're adding 10 yards to it, it'd be $30. If it goes out to bid, does that $30 mean it could be $130? My question is there any way we can find out if we have met the requirements of the bid and just use the yardage price to continue? That would be a hairy question, I think, Joe, don't you?
Yeah, and the way the core is, the bid form is broken out, it is very specific to a price per yard, exclusive of mob cost, because mob is a different line item and disposal is. So logic says that those prices would apply, but as you point out, Alfred, we need the contractor to confirm that.
Well, I think we need somebody with a procurement pass and stuff to say that's where we should try for, because that's
Yeah.
probably going to be the cheapest way we're going to get it.
Yes, agreed. And again, that goes back to the point that this is a competitive bid already, under the core scope. So that's how we truly get a competitive price for our piggyback. Okay, so certainly we need to follow up on this. What I would like to do is just quickly go through some documents that we will need if we have to do an RFP, some of which we would have to have anyway to do a contract, even if we're able to use the core contractor, because it won't be a contract between the core and the contractor. It would be between the town and the contract for the piggyback. So we would need some scope documents and drawings, which essentially GEI would already have. I would assume that the town has terms and conditions and insurance requirements. Who would have those, or who would produce those?
I would think that would be, once that information comes
Law.
from GEI, that would go with the town administrator and town council.
Would that be developed? Would that come from our outside counsel? Or I would think we've been down this path already. We should have at least a starting document.
At that time, Chris, Harry was also wearing the hat of
Yeah.
town council, representing the town in the mitigation and all of those negotiations. So again, you might look to him as a resource for what occurred at that time.
Yes, I will. Again, if someone, I guess, Joe, you're going to send me Harry's phone number anyway.
Right.
Yeah, that'd be great. When it comes to some of the other niceties of the scope, such as survey, I think the language in our contract or proposal would be that the contractor needs to follow the same procedure, guidelines, equipment as he's required to do in the core, because they're very detailed, very prescriptive as to what the certified survey would be, both the before and after, and that forms the basis for payment. So I don't think we would want to do anything less stringent than that. Plus, if he's really optimistic about meeting the schedule, he could do that pre-certified survey for us concurrent with the one he does for the core, which would be done in probably August or September probably.
Chris, the one question I had about that was there was this discussion about adding an extra foot or two to the dredge, and is that something that is in there for the town's portion or not?
The quantities. Oh, you're talking for the piggyback? Well, yeah, for the piggyback, it's L Pier and North Anchorage. The GEI,
Right.
the GEI numbers include overdredge, yes.
Okay, so so that is part of is within the scope that we're putting out.
Yes, it would be.
Okay.
If he can get that. Now, what's interesting though is the Corps broke up their package so that the bid form is for the actual dredging without the overdredge, and then they have a line item for the overdredge. And the reason for this, from Craig, he said, was on the one hand, they're trying to carve out a little window for us, but I think the more compelling reason for the Corps is they may be concerned that the total cost is going to bust their number. And I think they're being driven by, well, at least get the main stuff done. Even if they don't get the overdredge done. But
Yeah, and in our case, that's why I thought it was more of an issue for us, because our area it's much more important that we do the overdredge in our area maybe than even the federal channel. Just because it's such a mess already.
yes. So again, the number, which I recall to be 56,000, that includes overdredge. But again, and this may be before you joined, Kurt, we talked about if the window we get is short and we can't do all the 56, we would still want to do, whatever gets us from the ramp.
Right, of
out.
course.
And,
Yep.
anything would be an improvement, plus it would further reduce what we have to do in subsequent years.
Right.
I guess if we have to do an RFP, there's probably a public notice advertised requirement.
Yeah.
And this would be something that someone like Mike Travato would be familiar with.
Mike Travato's just coming on now.
Hi, everyone. My apologies. I had my calendar messed up and had you on the wrong time frame. I'm sorry. I just literally joined the conversation. Someone have a question for me?
Oh, we have several.
I'm
Well,
afraid of.
you know how it is. The person who's not here gets all the assignments. No, what we do want to pursue. We saw Dan's note that you and Dan spoke about the procurement process, and we do want to pursue that a little more with you. Offline. We want to reach out to Harry, who was the incumbent during a lot of this dredging stuff. So he has some good experience and perspective on it, as well as knowledge on the procurement. Basically, Mike, our question is, the Corps is a competitive bid situation. Does that truly not satisfy our competitive bid requirements? And
Not according to the Attorney General's office. I think I mentioned I spoke with Deb Anderson, and they handle procurement from the legal side of the state procurement laws as it relates to construction. She felt that you cannot you can't add it into the federal bid process. You have to do it separately. But also, as Dan mentioned, you can put it out as a separate bid. We could certainly line item it to where we could put it for like a contract for up to 30 days, ask for a daily rate, ask for the cost to, bring the equipment in, bring the equipment out as part of the bid process. It's probably, and Deb even admitted this, in all likelihood, going to restrict you to the to the winning bidder from the federal, is because it's going to be less expensive for them because their equipment's already going to be there. But just technically, we have to do it that way to, in fairness to anyone else. This is not an inexpensive contract.
But when she made her determination, was she fully aware that the Corps is competitively bidding it and that it's not an IDIQ type contract from the Corps?
I gave her exactly the language you had given me, Chris,
Yeah.
verbatim. I sent that over to her. So, she's fully cognizant of what the situation is with the Corps. Now, if somebody has knowledge from another municipality in Massachusetts that's done piggybacking, I'm happy to talk to them about it and see how they felt it, and certainly could pass that along to the AG's office and say, how is it that this municipality was able to piggyback? You're telling me that we can't. But as things stand right now, that's the rendering we've gotten from the state on this. Any other information notwithstanding.
Okay. Well, we are going to get a perspective. We're going to start local with Harry Parkanian, particularly because he was on the dredging committee or the select board and the town administrator. So he's got a lot of firsthand knowledge on this, and then we'll go forward. We'll do this in concert, Mike, with you and Dan. You know, we're not trying to
Chris,
go off on the weeds on our own.
Yeah. Well, you're going to have to anyway, because obviously any town bidding process has to be cleared by the chief procurement officer, which is the town administrator.
Sure.
So, you know, we need to cross the Ts and dot the Is on any bidding process.
Hey, Mike,
Chris?
Harry was obviously the chief procurement officer for the town before, but the reason it sticks in my mind more than anything else is Harry actually completed the advanced procurement training. And I know it was like a year-long kind of a thing for him to go through. So and being an attorney, he's going to have probably more knowledge than as much knowledge as anybody on.
Yeah,
if there's-
and Dan and I have both completed that training. We've both completed the training as well. So,
okay, great.
no, but I'm happy. Hey, I offer any outside assistance and insight. We certainly can vet all of that. So certainly not claiming to be the know-it-all on any of that. That's why I was quickly referred to the state on this, because, you know, wasn't sure myself. And, you know, that's why I wanted to check and make sure. Certainly a contract of this size gets incredible scrutiny as well. So you certainly do want to absolutely do this extremely above board and by the book, I guess is what I'm saying.
Sure.
The way the notes that Deb Anderson put out to you was that she didn't close the door on us. She provided two different options, which sounded reasonable.
Right. Yeah. And that's one option that I think is the viable one that Dan had recommended as well, which is that we put out for, you know, a contract that would be a daily rate upwards of 30 days or whatever. Pick a time window that you think that we could logically expect on the piggyback side to have available. It could be 1 to 30 days, 1 to 45, whatever the days are. And that way we could put that bid out separately just for this aspect of it, the piggyback aspect. And then you could do a totally separate bidding process for the full-blown dredge work in 21, 22.
Yeah, I would agree with structuring the scope split that way. But I wouldn't solicit prices for a daily rate. I would get price per cubic yard, keep mob and demob separate, but a daily rate doesn't incentivize them to do any digging. It just incentivizes them to bring his equipment.
Yeah. Okay.
So-
Yeah, Chris, I defer to you on that. Certainly from the technical side of dredging, when we put this bid together, we certainly want any and all knowledgeable help on putting that together. And if cubic yards is the way to go versus daily rate, then that's fine too. I'm sorry. I should have left that out of it.
And I think just before you joined, we were talking about whether we do have to do an RFP. Regardless, we have to do contract documents to be ready. And so my question was, do we already have terms and conditions document and insurance requirements and items like that? Are there documents that we can start reviewing to make sure they apply? Maybe they have to be slightly modified. Who's the keeper of those documents?
Well, they vary depending on the project. Obviously, we have those from various contracts over the years. I certainly can go through anything that I have access to see what's applicable to this. You know, I don't want to say they're like snowflakes, but there's a certain commonality to those, and then there's a certain uniqueness to them. So the answer to really answer your question, let us look on this end to see what we have for existing documentation, and then we can go from there. You know, we certainly don't want to reinvent any wheels here. If there's already a dredging contract out there, whether it's ours or in other communities, we certainly could use a lot of that boilerplate from that. So let us start internally first. There's no sense in starting something from scratch. See what we have for documentation here. I don't know the last time the town did any dredge work. My guess is may not be any kind of dredge contract here unless, is Will on? I don't know if Will's on.
Yes.
Well, do you have any knowledge on last time we did any dredging? Or do you guys in the task force know?
Sorry, that was in the 90s, right? The last contract could probably be found at Town Hall.
Yeah, if it's that far out, and I'm not sure how germane it might be, but, or whether it's accessible in some sort of archive somewhere.
There is one in 2001.
Yeah, I think we're carving things in stone back then, so we may not have electronic versions of it.
I think GEI had offered also, because there are a number of municipalities that have gone recently. And so there would be model Commonwealth documents from some other municipalities, and GEI, I think, was said at an earlier meeting that they have access to that. They might be
Yeah,
used.
you're absolutely right. Typically, we can get a lot of this documentation from our consultants who obviously have experience with this and have been dealing with other communities more recently, and can use a lot of that as a starting point for creating the right documentation.
Chris,
Yes.
in developing the plan for dredging, at the beginning of the prior dredging committee, we learned that the town of Duxbury, Massachusetts, was developing a plan at the same time. They subsequently had the Army Corps come in and do their channel, and then they did the Inner Harbor. Two members of the dredging committee at that time visited there, met with the TA and the harbor master, and gave them the entire file of the project overview. I have a copy of that, and I'd be willing to pass it on to you. So they may be another resource that might be helpful to us.
That was a case, you say, where the Corps did it on behalf of Duxbury.
The Corps did the channel like they're going to do for us.
Yeah, but did they also do some Duxbury work?
I don't know that,
Okay.
but
Because we did ask them about doing we asked them about doing the piggyback, and well, for one thing, as you'd expect, the contractor has to finish the core work first, but also the Corps said that they would be very expensive to do our work just the way they're structured commercially. So just to circle back, Mike, you're going to look for documents, templates that we can use, and we'll adopt those templates, tweak them as necessary.
Yeah, I think between.
If you like, I can reach out to GEI and see what documents they have.
Sure.
I certainly expect they would have scope documents. They may or may not have town-related documents, again, town requirements, but I'll see what they have. But we would certainly want them to be reflective of town of Wellfleet requirements.
Yeah, you're probably going to have better success there. I will check here, but like if as you say, it's been 20 years since we dredged that channel. I doubt our documentation there is going to be.
I think 20 years ago, Joe, you may recall this, the contract was with or through the state, I think. I don't think the town contracted directly with the contractor, but
Area 1 was a 50-50 split between the state and the town cost-wise. It was overseen by the chief engineer at the State Division of Waterways.
Okay.
So Chris, let's just, maybe we can just kind of cut to the quick on this aspect of it. If you or Will, whichever of you two wants to do it, to check with GEI and see what they have, that'd be very helpful. I'll check on this end. I'll check, certainly can check with the county, see what they have. They might have some germane documents to this, and certainly can check with if there's any other towns that you guys know, and certainly I'll check around that may have recently done dredge work. We can contact their town halls as well, talk to our counterparts there.
Well, Joe had mentioned Duxbury. Is that a town we should contact, Joe?
We certainly could, yeah. Maybe find something even closer here. I don't know if anybody on the Cape, I'm trying to think whether even in Barnstable, whether we've done any recently. Certainly can check. I can check with the.
I think Chatham also did some in recent years.
I'll check with the procurement officer at Barnstable too, and we'll pursue that. So from the municipal side, with documentation. we have.
Barnstable and Falmouth probably have the most recent ones. I did actually call Chatham yesterday and did speak with their natural resources director who's in charge of that. And they've actually had it's a weird relation. They've not done their own dredging. It's been core dredging work.
Yeah. I know Barnstable just does now you're just saying that, Kurt, they recently did stuff down in Osterville, Sampson Island area. I know that was
Right.
recently. I'm not sure who
Yeah,
did
there's
that.
some stuff out there.
Yeah, so I'll check there. Okay.
Mike, this is Alfred. I got a question for you, if I may.
Yeah. Hey, Alfred.
This is all well and good, but we've talked about 30, 60, 90 days or something.
Yeah.
We don't know if we have any window of that thing. I mean, my concern is that, let's say this goes out to bid, which it may have to, and somebody else wins the bid, and the other contractor doesn't get out of here in time, we're screwed.
No,
I mean,
yeah, well, Alfred,
I think we really need to look at explaining to the state the concern about rebidding this thing. All right, because if I was to get the contract, and you had the original contract, and you said we're going to screw Alfred, all we got to do is leave our equipment here, and say we're still working at it, because technically the window here is theirs.
yeah. I understand that from a practical standpoint, Alfred, certainly, and Chris was great to give me a very detailed outline of the project, especially for this year, as it relates to Army Corps. And it was all in detail explained to the state, all of that. They're well aware of the situation.
Yeah, but Mike, we may not have 30, 60, 90 days for somebody else to come here.
Right. So you're right.
And then at that point, if we don't have the time, all this discussion and work is for nothing.
So that's the whole point of this, is that the best thing that we can do, and I say best meaning, I think our best option, based on all the information I have at this point, is to go with this short-term bidding, put it out there. It'd be very well spelled out that it's going to be contingent on there being any window. So any bidder is going to be aware that it may not happen, even if they put their bid in, that it's going to be contingent on that. And that there's going to be, the Army Corps is going to be in there, or the federal contractor will be in there ahead of them. So that's all going to be spelled out, so they're at least aware, and it's a buyer beware situation for them. And I think that what the common wisdom is here, as we said at the beginning, is that most likely for that smaller contract, when I say, a limited amount of cubic yards of work done in a short time window, your logical bidder is going to be the winning bidder from the feds, not anyone else who in their right mind would want to do that. And it's a loophole, but it's a legal loophole. I mean, the AG's office is the one that said it, So I think that we hopefully would get the result that we want out of this, which is to piggyback, but we'll be able to do it through the proper legal state procurement laws. And we're not going to bypass those. So, I don't really want to risk going to jail, quite frankly. So,
Alfred, essentially this package, if we have to go RFP, will state that there's 24 hours to mobilize.
I don't disagree with that, but I don't think you're going to get anybody to bid on something of that nature.
well, we would
well,
all.
that-
That's
Go
the
ahead.
point. I think hopefully we'll get the winning bidder from the Army Corps.
Providing we can afford that. I mean, if I was him, I would be bidding high.
Well, we can refuse the bid. I mean, that's
Well, I think hopefully we can maybe get a determination once that successful bidder has been identified, maybe through Craig Martin. Maybe we can get some type of an MOU that says his prices will extend to the town of Wellfleet work.
my understanding from what you sent me, Chris, from past discussions with Craig, was that they want to keep this as separate and don't want to conflate any of the local bidding process here with theirs. Was that my understanding from what I saw from Craig's
Yeah, no,
email?
that's true. The MOU would be from the successful contractor. Just
But I don't think they can legally do that, Chris, is my point. I don't think they could put that into their contract.
no, I wasn't expecting it to be in the contract, just a side MOU.
Yeah, again, yeah, it's still a legal document, so I'm not sure it could happen, but anyway. Is what it is.
Me it also, and Harry may have some insight on this, or if the question hasn't already been asked, maybe it has, but what the criteria are for awarding a sole source contract. It's kind of like one of those things where this screams of being a sole source contract for a variety of different reasons. But either way, we can, we'll be able to comply.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see, to summarize, Joe, you're gonna call Dr. Eve and you're gonna call
Dr.
Harry.
Schluter and Russell Titmus,
Yes, okay.
born engineering.
I was gonna reach out to GEI about scope documents and stuff, unless you prefer to do that. I'm happy to do it though.
Nah, this time of year, go right ahead.
Right. Mike, you'll look for templates that we will need, certainly for a contract, and therefore they would have to be part of an RFP if we end up having to go down the RFP.
Right.
I'll call Harry. And I was going to call Dan Hort first just to let him know, but Mike, can you convey this to Dan that, we're going to pursue this a little bit more to see if there is an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan and I had the conversation yesterday.
Yeah. So if you would just update him on what we spoke about just now.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else with respect to piggyback dredging?
I don't know if this relates directly to piggyback, but can I just ask this, and you guys may have already, I remember I've not been involved with a lot of your meetings here in the past. I remember attending a meeting with Jack Units and a consultant from the county were at with you guys.
Right.
Have you guys ever had the discussion about having, and maybe you're thinking GAI as your person, but someone handling this soup to nuts? This is a $15+ million project. And, it might be well served to enlist whoever your consultant is, whether it's GI or if it's maybe someone like this lady from the county, to kind of shepherd this project through between, the procurement and then obviously the implementation of this as a, maybe even a project manager.
I think that is money well spent. In 2001, when the Channel and Area 1 were dredged, I believe there was a clerk of the works who tied all of those pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
So I would endorse that, completely.
Yeah, it is it's a $15 million construction project. So,
And added to that is whatever amount the state should kick in, they're probably going to require that anyway.
Yes, oh, absolutely.
To meet their standard of compliance. And, I would think that they would look upon a clerk of the works who has done this professionally rather than one of us.
Joe, was the clerk of the works, for example, a temporary or town employee, or came from a consultant?
No, I believe it came from a consultant.
Sure, okay.
Someone who did that frequently and really knew the ropes.
What we could do is...
But if I could just complete that.
Yeah, go ahead.
The standards of compliance 20 years ago have changed, as we all know, with new players, with new rules, mainly the turtle issue with the endangered species.
Sure. Yeah.
Department. And, when I started the negotiations with Dr. Schluter, one of the first things she let me know was they could shut us down at any time, both in the channel and in the inner harbor, okay? That changed the tone of the thing. And Harry picked it up from then on in terms of negotiating with her and in terms of the mitigation. But I'd be surprised if that agency alone, as well as the other agencies, the state agencies involved, would not be looking to a professional clerk of the works. And we certainly don't want to, if we didn't use that kind of a professional, we might run the risk of slowing the project down.
Do you think, and that's a good idea, we can certainly chase a clerk of the works through people such as GEI or Foth Engineering, which is who Christine works for. And
Russell Titmus at Bourne would also, I would
Bourne
think.
is GEI.
He's GEI though.
Right.
Yeah, yes.
But within GEI, Russell Titmus, who has volumes of our work going back 20 years, would also be a good resource.
So,
Okay.
Chris, I do have a call in to Christine from Foth, and just waiting to hear back from her. I certainly would like to pursue that line of dialogue with her to see, what the best pathway is for us on this. And then, beyond her, we can certainly continue to pursue this, but, as quickly as possible. But yeah, I think there's a gap here. And again, I'm jumping in here, in the middle innings here. So, I would definitely think that this is a project that needs that kind of thing, and I think it may require it, quite frankly, at the cost of the construction job here, and to the point of answering to the state and even to the feds if we have to. So yeah, I'll pursue it from my end, just what I can find out relative to that, and get back to you on what I find out from that.
Why wouldn't our engineering firm be fulfilling that role?
They may not have. It's really a matter of what their capacity is. Will, we're talking about a lot of things across the board here. And again, my knowledge on dredging is I see people, equipment scooping stuff off the channel. That's the extent of my knowledge. Other than that, I'm just a sailor. So there may be things, like the turtle thing, like permitting, even the procurement process on this, maybe guiding us on this further. It could be a wide scope of things that somebody's more adept at because they're focused specifically on dredge projects. So, you may find somebody that's just better suited. I mean, everybody's got their specialties, and GI maybe, but we can certainly ask them as well.
I disagree with that
I would
statement.
use the analogy of a clerk of the works to the work that Craig Martin has done in our behalf. A technical person who does this for a living and has served the town well. I had another thought. In 2001, I observed the clerk of the works at that time. I think he was here every day, most of the day, if not every other day. So not only did he facilitate it, but he was here observing to make sure everything was up to snuff, so that if the feds or the state had any issues, he was the point guy the town looked to resolve them.
Well, that's in fact what the feds are going to do. They're going to have resources here in Wellfleet Harbor while their contractor does the dredging for the federal channel. And they've already got 2 vessels here parked on the pier. So you can see that they definitely plan to do that.
I'm referring to the area by the launching ramp we're talking about, as well as areas 1 and 2.
Right. So let's do this. Mike, when you talk to Christine, ask her specifically recommendations on clerk of the works. And I would make the distinction that right now, we want to concentrate on the piggyback version of it, meaning work to be done this year. And I will ask Russell Titmus a similar question. The broader scope, we may want to structure, I hate to say it, an RFP to go out for the 2 years of the other. But I would think, because don't forget, for this piggyback, we may only be talking 2 weeks work. An engineering firm might have a person suitable for clerk of the works for that short period.
Right.
And if we have any other recommendations or proposed candidates, we can certainly look at that. But I would think the piggyback portion would be a little bit different than the next phase over 2 years.
Yeah, I agree.
If I may, why wouldn't we use the engineering company that has all our documents, who has done all our work to get the permits, and ask them for a clerk of the works versus asking somebody who hasn't read any of our documents? I find that a little concerning, unless we don't believe the engineering company we've hired has done a good job.
No, Will, that was why I was going to talk to Russell Titmus. He's part of GEI. I could start with Dan Robbins, but I would agree for continuity and particularly for piggyback.
I'm concerned that we're asking another engineer or a group to basically check up, and maybe that's necessary, but I don't understand why we would ask them for a clerk over the works when we're saying the other one may not know what's going on. We've paid them an awful lot of money to get us an awful lot of permits, so I hope they know what's going on.
And right, Alfred, that they also were on board with the most recent information from federal government and state government. So I think we got to.
So why would you ask somebody else to do that? I find that wrong, as you can tell in my tone of voice. I think that if we're going to keep this moving, we want to make sure it stays within house so that these people, I mean, if you told me somebody else was going to supervise a job I did, I'd tell you guys to have a nice day.
If I could inject a little history here, and over the last 20 years, when the town used Russell Titmus at that time, Born Engineering, he oversaw the core samples and everything else. But the state agencies and all of the, the turtle people, the water quality and so forth, they told us quite clearly they wanted to deal primarily with our engineer, with Russell. So he met with them and they laid out all of their requirements, and we paid him to provide them with all of the data and information that they needed for them to issue the permits. So all of that process going back 20 years, he has in his files. So to build on what Alfred is saying, I would strongly agree that why not use an existing resource who knows the town in talking about process. Throughout all of that, he was excellent in communication and in coming here and meeting with us whenever we felt the need. And at times he took the initiative to ask for a meeting to come here. But when we were touching base with the turtle people, with the water quality, with the Division of Waterways and so forth, they were giving us positive reviews that they were getting everything they needed from Russell Titmus.
So
why not use that resource
yeah.
going forward? And when we met with VH from GEI, I talked with that about that with him, and he acknowledged that Russell could be a player as we move forward.
Is that a current discussion that Russell is available?
That was taken care of last summer.
Yes.
Okay. Mike, Will, and I spent 2.5 hours with VH, a good hour of it walking Kendrick Avenue, by the way, and him giving his opinion about a plan including the fuel tanks. But, you know, he did acknowledge that Russell had 20 years and files and the knowledge and would be a resource. So why not, as Alfred is saying, why not utilize that resource?
So 2 points I just want to make subsequent to Alfred's comments, which I don't just totally disagree with. And as a matter of fact, I mentioned GEI as one of the things that I thought Chris was going to check into. We don't know what we don't know. So the more people we can talk to, the more we'll find out what we don't know. So that's why I would like to talk to more than one person, and I'm happy to do that. It costs us nothing but my time to do that. The second thing is that if we are going to hire someone to do that, depending on the dollar value of what that contract's going to be, we may have to put it out to bid anyway. We may have to put competitive bidding for that. So, you know, we can't just hire GEI to do another project. If it, depending on the procurement, you know, where this falls in the scope of the procurement laws, it may end up having to go out for bid.
Is there a known threshold for that? Do we know what that is already?
Typically, that's this type of work under $10,000. You can use best practices. Anything over $10,000 has to go out for bid, unless it's just architectural work or engineering work. But if you're talking about bringing someone in for other type of work, it has to go. It falls under. I don't know the
May I
answer.
for a second?
It really depends.
Hey, Mike?
Yeah.
The other reason I mentioned that is they're the ones who drew the pier when it was rebuilt. They're the ones who drawn a lot of the structural part of the marina being rock revetments and stuff. So, I mean, if there is a problem during dredging, they're going to have the ones with a backup file immediately.
Yeah, I hear you. I understand. In an ideal world, makes a lot of sense. We may not be able to just sign a contract with them depending on what this is valued at. We may have to put it out for bid.
Well, I didn't know if you were aware of the history. That's all. I apologize for that.
No, that's fine. I get it. They've got institutional knowledge right now, and it's ideally nice to work with that type of person.
Not only do they have the knowledge, but they've gone through the permit procedure on each one of those projects.
Yep. No, fully understand. It's just that I'd like to tell you it's that simple that we can just hire the guy we like to go with. We don't necessarily, can't necessarily do that.
Just a bit of history. Several years ago, when we were meeting with Craig Martin and Ed O'Donnell, who at that time was the head of the Division of Navigation for the Army Corps, they talked a bit about bidding. And in that context, they said, well, when we get the bids in from the various contractors, we look at them carefully and we know who the players are and we know who does good work. So we place some weight on that, the quality of the work. And I think that bears remembering as we move forward, you know, by the launching ramp, but if we had to go independent, but also for areas 1 and 2. That a clerk of the works, a GEI company that does this all the time, would provide us with good advice about who the quality people are.
Yeah, I will reach out to Russell today or tomorrow on this clerk of the works, as well as what documents they might have. I think we all recognize the benefit of the continuity and the performance today of GEI. It's something we would benefit from.
By the way,
I'm sympathetic to our other administrative requirements. We want to make sure that we don't get tripped up in it, but
by the way, the engineer there who worked with Russell every step of the way was Alyssa Richards.
She's the one that's working on this mitigation thing as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So again, one more data point for continuity.
Yeah, and she knows the history well.
Okay. Anything else on piggyback dredging? Okay. Just very quickly, public outreach. I had received some comments from Joe and from Skip, so I incorporated those. I reissued the document this morning for people to see if they have any more comments, and then we should talk about, and I know Nancy's away, we'll probably have to wait for any of her comments. At some point in time, Will, I assume you'll take the lead in terms of how and how often you want to communicate with the boating community on this?
Every day. That's what we're doing now.
Yeah. Well, if
Every day.
people can look at the document, if there's anything else that you want me to put in it, let me know. Otherwise, you know, it's a guideline. If we want to formalize it, dress it up, we can do so. I'll just look for some guidance on that from each of you.
Sure. No problem.
And then the remaining permits we already talked about. It has to do with the thing on the Army Corps mitigation and notice of intent, the NOI. So that's all I have on the agenda for now. Anyone have anything else?
Chris, when you're talking with Russell Titmus about the issue of clerk, you might also question him about the permitting by the launch ramp. He may have knowledge of that and in his file.
Yes. Okay.
Chris, no, just a question. I keep hearing a $15 million number. How old is that number, and is that still accurate?
The number is a couple years old, although it was repeated in the document we got from GEI, which we got, I guess it was last fall. Or no, maybe it was their first quarter of this year. But it's an estimate. You know, there's cost, and then there's also market conditions that drive a contractor's price. So if he's full up and his equipment is spoken for, typically contractors will bid higher.
That figure was established 3 to 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And Mike, you weren't here earlier, but I brought up what Craig Martin, the Army Corps engineer, told us at that time, that the mayonnaise, the silt, continued to flow in at a rate of at least 8,000 to 10,000 cubic yards a year.
Into the channel, into the core work, Joe?
Into the inner part as well.
Yeah.
And you know, several years ago, everybody involved pretty much agreed that we're probably looking at 16 million. And that was several years ago.
Well, Chris, remember that Christine, when we brought in the county administrator, that she supplied us with 3 different estimates. And that came from the information from her background and from her company. So as I remember, it was like $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 dollars, or $50. No, it was 50 to 30.
I think it ranged from 40 up to about 60.
Exactly. So that's within the last 6 months, 7 months. So it could be.
That's a big swing. Obviously, we prefer the $40 range.
Right.
So has anyone done the math on what that means at $60 in terms of this project, or?
More than 15,000 or 15 million.
Yeah.
Well, more means $1 more or
No, significantly more. Well, it's 50% higher than the 40, so it
the 40 was based on the 15. 15 was based on the 40.
pretty much. Yeah, actually, mathematically, on the current quantity, I think it's $38.
Jeez.
If you back into it.
That means that my math tells me we're over 20 million then.
Yeah, and that's actually, that needs to be its own topic in the near term. How and where are we going to chase funding?
Yeah, well, definitely.
In fact, I think we should schedule a discussion on that in the near term.
The other moving part on that was the resiltation rate that I thought, didn't they do a survey just within the last 2 months to try to quantify that, to see what the actual numbers look like now when they did the, I can't remember, they did some.
Yeah, GEI
the coastal studies did it. That's what we've been working on, the one that the coastal studies gave us. And that came out in the Wellfleet Harbor colloquium that they had up at the school.
So at least that's no longer a question mark, right?
Well, one thing, the latest numbers that we're using came from the GEI survey that was performed in February of this year.
Right.
The second one, yeah.
At least we
Yeah.
have-
I don't remember seeing any coastal quantities per se. But
I spoke with the person who oversaw that last fall, Mr. Borman, Mark Borman at Coastal Studies. And I was interested in what kind of junk existed on the floor there, which could impede progress. And because there's all kinds of stories, as Alfred can tell you, about what constituted a mooring in the old days down there, including an old refrigerator, told to me by one old timer. He told me that when the sonar study was completed, it wasn't too bad. There wasn't too much down there.
Okay. One other question while we pursue funding. Who else should be on a call like that? I mean, aside from ourselves and everyone who's here today, is there anyone else that we should include on that to discuss what the current funding opportunities are? You know, the 15 million and therefore the 7.5 from the town was all predicated on the state coming up with a match or 50-50. And I don't believe that's the case anymore. I don't think that legislative program is still available.
When Jay Ash at that time was the Secretary of Economic Development, he came here 2 years ago and met with us. And he told us how the governor took all dredging out of the Division of State Waterways and put it in economic development. And he told us at that time that the state was having an active discussion of doing a 50-50 split, but don't count on it. He mentioned that 9 months later, that was still what they were thinking, 50-50. That was in the context of the $15 million figure. I think there's a huge elephant in the room now regarding the state's funding, and that's the COVID-19. We know the state is stressed financially. So I question whether or not they're even going to meet the 50-50 split that they speculated about. Now, in all the meetings, and I was in all the meetings with Sarah Peak and Julian Sear, and their comment was there was an advantage to splitting Area 1 and Area 2 up into 2 projects over 2 years, because we would be tapping into the state budget for whatever amount they were going to give us over 2 years and not all in one. But I think at this point in time, they are key people in terms of monitoring, you know, if the state is going to allocate anything to any towns for dredging, given the stress financially that they are now under and will continue to be under probably for another year.
So what do you think is the best way to initiate dialogue with them to try and get a update, current assessment of if the state is likely or able to participate?
Well, I think there has to be meetings from time to time with them, but I would speculate that they probably don't know the answer to that at this point in time, because we're still in the midst of the crisis. We don't know if there's going to be another wave of it, but I've watched those governor and read, you know, his news conferences, his people, and they're talking about, you know, real stress on the state financially. Now, you know, I spent 30 years in state government, and I learned recently the trial court, the Massachusetts trial court, doesn't even have the money from the state for judges, for recall judges, for those who want to go on summer vacation. I mean, that's a pretty drastic measure for the state to take. So I think that the jury on that question is still out, and has to be monitored carefully. And before a sit down with them, I would think, you know, they're going to want an updated figure for areas 1 and 2. And I would bet surely that it's not 15 million anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would think that that estimate could be, once we see what the pricing is for the core, particularly the price per cubic yard, and we apply it to our known quantities, I think that would be a pretty representative update of what the market conditions are.
So Chris, this is where I would say Mike Travato should get in touch with Secretary Keneally, because he's really in charge of the money. He knows, he's very much aware of Wellfleet needing dredging. He knows we've been needing it for a long time. And I know the state budget, of course, town budgets are all askew this year, but there is some responsibility there for them. So maybe Mr. Travato can soon, not this week, but as we get a little closer, even in a couple weeks, well, we actually have time, but he's the one that is in charge of giving us money for dredging. And it wouldn't hurt to talk to him some more.
Yeah. Will, Will, you have a contact at Keneally's office, right? I know it was regarding the Seaport grant, but do you think he'd be a good contact for us?
Yeah, he's his assistant, Keneally's assistant.
Yeah. We'll reach out to him.
Yeah, he's the one.
Okay, very good. Anything else? Should we target another meeting so that we can provide all these updates among ourselves, either within 1 or 2 weeks?
Sure. I think it's important. I mean, we're getting close.
Yeah.
I'm not doing much, so it's not up to me, but you know, these little timelines and make sure the permits are going and that everybody's on board. I think, you know, the next 2 months are gonna fly by.
Yeah, I wouldn't go any longer than 2 weeks. Actually, by that time, we should know what the price is and the presumably apparent low bidder on the core work. Those bids are due the 15th of this month. So, do people have preference on days and time of day?
The earlier the better in the morning, I would prefer.
Okay, what's early?
Oh, anytime, you know, I would imagine from 9 o'clock on would be
Yeah.
okay.
No, that's fine. Will, what about you?
Yeah, mornings are great. Anytime during the day when I'm out here at the office would be great.
Okay. And so we'll target 9 a.m. Is there anyone who can't do 9 a.m.? All right. I'll look at the calendar and I'll pick two dates, both of them no later than 2 weeks from now.
Just an idea there. You might want to wait until we've got the bid numbers. That'd be really helpful once we have those bid numbers.
Yeah. So we'll target it after the 15th of July.
Chris, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Is this project an all or nothing? Or, you know, I'm thinking relative to the funding now. If we can't get 100% funding, are we still plodding through with this project, you know, on a, as much money as we have, we do as much of the channel in the Inner Harbor as we can? Or I'm not sure what the discussion has been historically on this.
Mike, are you referring to areas 1 and 2?
I'm just
Yeah.
referring to the big picture. I mean, we're talking a $15 million project, 18, 20, whatever. If we don't get 100% funding, how do you proceed on a project if you don't have all the funding? Are we doing this in phases? I mean, how do you do even the piggyback if you don't have the money allocated to do the rest of the project? I mean, I'm not sure what
Well, I would say the piggyback has benefits of its own, almost mutually exclusive to the others. They all have benefits. I would think that as we monitor the funding, we may have to set priority on what to do with limited funding. I would think we would still want to do it, but we either don't go as deep or we do a specific area. I'm not knowledgeable enough to have a educated opinion, but the other people on the call I think would. So we probably should give that some thought. If we have to phase it because of funding, how would we phase it?
right.
I would like to offer this, having been involved in negotiations in the past to secure the permitting with the state. There is a real concern in dealing with them that I have. If we go back 5, 6 years, in discussing with the state areas 1 and 2, as we know, area 2 has a much larger cubic yard area, almost double than area 1. And one of the concerns I have is at that time, the state was trying to take the position with us that, well, we'll give you the money for area 1. Be satisfied with that. But we don't know about area 2. So we then looked to the engineers, Russell Titmus at that time, and recently VH at GEI. And they stated rather firmly that that would be a disaster. They describe area 2 as a giant sucking sponge. If you only do area 1, area 2 is going to bring all of area 1 is going to be a sucking sponge and bring all the silt from area 2 into the inner harbor. And VH last summer stated to us that it is absolutely imperative that area 2 be done as well, or we're going to be back here in a couple of years looking to dredge area 1.
Is there a case to be made that you do area 2 not quite as deep, and then perhaps area 1
No,
quite as deep?
he was emphatic that it would have to be done completely. It's been 1957 since it was last done, and we all know what it contains now. But I think we have to be prepared to brief our legislators and state officials and have the engineers back us up to present a strong case on that if they're not going to help us fund area 2, it's going to be a disaster.
Economic impact.
I'd like to elaborate on that. Area 2 also is probably one of the largest places that we have oysters in the inner harbor, which is now being covered. So, I mean, we should get the shellfish warden to document, no, I'm serious, to document the fact that because area 2 is full, it is now increased onto all the shellfish area, and that we should go from that as a support program too, not just because for the boaters, but the fact that environmentally, I don't know how many acres that represents, and maybe we should do that to show that we're going to lose production of shellfish.
To pick up on that point, when we were strategizing 5 years ago in how to present our case to the state, the aquaculture industry was a main part of that. The state officials were really ignorant about where we stand, 1 and 2 with Duxbury. And then a state study came out. And the study said regarding aquaculture that the greatest threat to Wellfleet's aquaculture farming was not diseases like Vibrio, but it was the encroachment of the mayonnaise. And in talking with various shellfishermen afterward, they confirmed that. And Alfred, you may want to elaborate on that. But I think that's another avenue we can pursue in building our case.
Well, we were fortunate enough to get money from SPAT to do the shellfish relay for part of it. When Nancy put the cohogs in the cove, where it was sand the year before, because of the mayonnaise being so thick in area 2, it suffocated them all. So here we've got a town-run program that failed because of the mayonnaise already. I mean, we need to document that we've had some failures where we shouldn't have. And I'm not saying that Nancy failed, but I'm just saying that we need her support to show how this stuff is failing where it didn't in the past.
It also happened with the mayo that overtook the propagation site area across from the pier. We lost about 6 million oysters that had been put in there from mulching, and that was doing a great job of reducing the nitrogen loads in the inner harbor. Substantial reduction. And 2 years ago, because of the black mayo, that got suffocated. And so clearly it's impacting in a variety of different ways.
It's a feather in our cap, I think, that the governor chose to put all of this in the Department of Economic Development, which certainly connects very well with our shellfish industry. So, I think we should look to that population, those folks who make up our shellfish industry, at the appropriate time to become a strong lobbying force for dredging.
I didn't mean to open up a whole can of worms here with that question, but because I'm sure that's a deep, in-depth discussion. I just really was trying to get a handle on what the expectation is here.
Well, Mike, I was going to bring it up down the road, as we proceed through the summer. So I think it is timely. It's always timely.
Joe, from a technical perspective, again, if we're dealing with limited funding, at least in the first couple years, is it feasible to do area 2 only and defer area 1 if we're funding bound?
Well, the answer, I think, is no, because if you did area 2, then that would be sucking, it would be the reverse situation. Without doing 2, the silt is going to spread from one to the other.
Yeah. Okay. All right. More on this. Okay. Anything else for this call?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you,
Thank
Courtney.
you, everyone. Good.
Thank
good
you, Courtney.
discussion.
Everybody, thank you, Chris, Mike.
Yep. See you guys.